Third of our mental health series. Tonight we look at what happens when someone with a mental health issue also suffers from an addiction. Mental health reform says more resources are needed to diagnose and treat people with what's known as a dual diagnosis. The organisation says only 7 out of almost 120 community mental health teams provide an addiction service, and that needs to change.
A mental health and an addiction problem, when a person has both types of problems, it's known as a dual diagnosis. 85% of people with an alcohol addiction also have an underlying mental health issue, such as anxiety or depression.
It makes sense, if you think about it, that sometimes people use an addiction as a way of coping with their mental distress if they don't know about more healthy ways of looking after their mental health.
My husband had spent years talking to specialists and AA members even and everything, saying there's something else wrong. I do believe he said the word depression a few times. If he had been listened to.
If you have a dual diagnosis, you tend to bounce around the services because the mental health services say, well, come back when you're sober, when you've got your alcohol addiction problem sorted. And the addiction treatment systems assume you don't have a mental health disorder.
People seem to think that if you drink too much, oh, he's an alcoholic or she's an alcoholic. There's more to it than that.
It's the one area of medicine where it's okay to blame the person, instead of actually standing back and saying, well, what was going on for that person in their life?
What he wanted to know was, do I cry much? Do I spend a lot of time in bed? And we backtracked to when Siobhan was born, and Siobhan is 21 now.
We don't have anybody with a clear leadership role to reduce the harm that alcohol abuse causes. And in the meantime, families continue to suffer.
Well, we're joined by Dr. Garrett McGovern, a GP who specialises in alcohol and substance abuse. Doctor, first of all, we heard from Valerie there, who was for 10 years battling with alcoholism, where she was undiagnosed with depression. How common is her story?
I'd say, Roisin, her story is very, very common. I mean, one of the problems we have in this country is both areas, mental health and substance and alcohol abuse, individually are under-resourced. They're at breaking point, actually. And actually, as an integrated service, it's absent. So this lady clearly fell between the cracks, and it wasn't really recognised that she probably had an underlying depression, and this was made worse by her drinking. So the service wasn't there to meet her need, essentially.
So they say possibly 85% of people who have an alcohol addiction have an underlying mental health problem. That's a lot of people, isn't it?
It's a huge amount of people. I mean, if you look at sort of alcohol figures alone, I mean, it's estimated there's about 150,000 dependent drinkers in this country. 1 million, probably nearly 1.5 million, who are just drinking too much. Now, hardly any of them are getting any treatment. Now, how many of those have a mental health problem as well as an addiction problem?
And is that a big concern of yours, that they are left undiagnosed, basically?
It is a huge problem because it causes an awful lot of physical and mental health problems for themselves, but also there are other people who are caught in the shrapnel of this, and they suffer greatly as well, and they're undertreated. They may need some counselling themselves.
How important is this to tackle it at a community level?
Well, we have a very patchy approach in a community. When it's done well, it's done very well. What we know from the research is that if you have an integrated approach, and when I talk about integrated, I mean mental health, I mean addiction, and in a community response, all the research shows that those patients have much better outcomes than if you deal with it sort of in silos. It just doesn't work when you try and do that because you're firefighting each of the individual problems.
So there's a call for more resources, particularly at community level. Is that where you see the priority?
I do. If you look at dual diagnosis as an entity in itself, we don't really have very many dual diagnosis facilities. We do have some private hospitals which really cost money, or else you need health insurance in order to secure those. But the vast, vast majority of people, the service need is not been met. So
for people who might be concerned for their loved ones, what should they do? What should they look out for, do you think?
Well, I think the first thing is, and I thought it was very well portrayed in your programme, is that there's a huge stigma associated with this. So people feel, and I think Carol mentioned it, about the whole idea of it almost being a misdemeanour to drink. It's treated sort of almost punitively. And I don't think people need to realise that if somebody is struggling with alcohol, you need to try and find out why are they struggling with alcohol and be a little bit more compassionate and a bit more understanding as a result.
Okay, Dr. McGovern, thank you for coming in.
Thank you.